and offices and homes, but there is retail, there is hospitality, there is warehousing and industrial. So that's generally the larger gamut of real estate at an institutional level. And now data centers is becoming a big thing. And each of these segments have been impacted by COVID in a very different way. So the first and foremost, I think home has become everything. You're working from home, you're living in home, you're schooling from home, and God forbid you're not doing hospital from home. But some situations like that also happened, as our healthcare system was overwhelmed, right? So what it has really done is it has actually made people think about homes and residential in a very different way across the globe. There has been a spike in residential demand. Generally speaking, people have been wanting to upgrade. Suddenly, second homes, which were just considered luxury, a lot of people have started thinking about it. People worry about another lockdown of 3 months, and then they want to go from Bombay to Pune and sit there and relax, and or go to a lot of villas, etc., that are near Bombay. So this is a kind of a trend that is happening. A lot of people who had these second home developments and were struggling with that, suddenly they are seeing their city homes are not selling that well, and these second homes were selling. But in general, if I were to say, it has put a bit of a premium on home ownership. So even the younger generation, which has a stronger bias towards renting versus owning, I think we are seeing a bit of those convergence. What is also happening very clearly is that there is a crowding of demand towards better players, better societies, which offer a lot more open areas, recreational, because again, people realize that when they got stuck up, they probably could enjoy what was within and not outside. So if you will, FY 2020, which was otherwise a year where about almost half the year went into lockdowns, I think the sales, residential sales for some of the larger developers, especially listed developers, has been FY 21, not FY 2020, FY 21, which is the April to March 2021, has been among the highest. December quarter has been one of the best quarters for many people. So if you will compare sales, and if I can just share my screen, I don't know if that's possible or not. It's not. It's okay. So you would see that
you can share the screen, Ashish.
Can I? Okay.
Yeah.
So let me just see if I can. Can you guys see my screen here? Just one sec. Yes, I want to just not really run through any presentation, but at an appropriate time, just show some statistics to people where it is relevant. Yeah. So, I mean, if you would see this, you would see that there has been a general uptrend, but FY21, which was half the year was lost, still your sales have more than doubled. The other interesting trend, which is also driving it, is if you would look at over the 5-year period, while the increase is almost just 1%, but there has been a dip and it has kind of gotten back into an increasing territory. So one most profound impact of COVID has been on residential, and I think people are more desirous of having better homes, more spaced out homes in better societies. That is there. On the other hand, I think office has gone through a significant transformation. So impact on office was not immediate, but it is a much more longer term structure. So to contrast, let's say the impact on retail was immediate. I mean, overnight, retail malls cannot open. So they had to give significant rental waivers. Any person invested in retail had really lost almost 6-9 months of rent. That didn't really happen with office. Most multinationals actually paid their contractual rentals and so on and so forth. There has been more vacancies though. But I think there is a fundamental rethinking going on how people use their offices, how those offices need to be designed. everybody will have their own desk, people will have their cabins and so on and so forth. I think suddenly there is a thinking there just need to be an X amount of working space, which will be used by whosoever needs to be in office that day, right? So again, the thinking even in the institutional world has gone through a massive, I would say, like constant reimagining what will happen. There was a point where people thought, okay, now nobody needs offices. And 6 months down the line, people also started realizing, no, I think there is a lot of fatigue in working from home, and you cannot maintain culture. You cannot encourage brainstorming by not having offices. Having said that, I think hybrid models will evolve. So that's happening. And the two sectors which have certainly benefited, they were already on that trajectory, is what we call industrial and warehousing, especially warehousing, because suddenly again e-commerce, which was already getting adopted quite significantly, now that adoption has again accelerated so much. Categories like your electronics and books and all that have been adopted long back, but let's say clothes, a lot of people were not still so much into e-commerce when it came to clothes. But over the last we realized we couldn't go out and shop. So there was no choice but to just buy online. And now you have gotten a little bit more comfortable doing so. So there has been new category adoption, which is clearly boosting warehousing. And finally, data centers. Nothing has put technology so much in front of us than the last 1 year. Everything is just technology. Like just this webinar, how many webinars used to happen before COVID, right? So I think a lot of fundamental changes. Office, I think, will get to a bit of a dicey situation, and you have to be very careful when you invest. It's not going away anywhere, but a lot more thought. I think we believe residential, there is a robust cycle for the next 4-5 years, and your industrial and data centers will be strong for sure. So that, I think, is a bit of a summary on that.
Yeah, thank you, Ashish, on that. So for, let's say, if someone has to invest the money, before the COVID, commercial was interesting and residential, the outlook was not great.
Right.
But, now seems like the dynamics have changed. Right. So, let's say we have different segments. You talked about warehouse, industrial. So let's say, if we look at residential, commercial, land and warehousing. So what do you think is going to happen to each of, these underlying asset classes in next few years? Which one do you think is going to do good and which is going to struggle?
So my view is, in general, honestly, and if stock markets are any barometer, so if we are going to continue to get good growth, and if stock markets are wherever they are, and conversation indicate that earnings are also headed in a direction which will at least bridge some of the overvaluation, right? So if that trend were to continue, to be honest, somewhere each of the segments will benefit, right? I think that growth kind of is there. Honestly, money is very cheap right now. So that fuels everything. It is fueling new businesses, it is fueling new growth, new demand, everything. So to that extent, ultimately residential real estate is a derivative sector. So it benefits from there. Purely the way we opportunistically look at it. So opportunistically, it's really, returns are a function of how good the operating performance is going to be and how much money is chasing that opportunity. So as an example, and somebody gave this very interesting example of Wipro. In some of the last conversation, I'm quoting someone else here. He said Wipro was valued at a certain level in 2000. And since then, it had a great operating run. But it was so highly valued in 2000 that despite that great operating run, investment wasn't great. So the point that I'm trying to make also, it's very relevant to what we are seeing today. I think the fact is that each of these segments, I think, are set for good operating run. Residential is set for a good operating run. Industrial is set for a good operating run. Data centers is a very new category and not that much knowledge is there. But again, there is a lot of growth in there. Office, I think the growth will be a little bit more modest. and it will go through its own cycle to a certain extent. But then where we really like the opportunities are residential, which is set for a great operating run, has very limited capital allocation. So the yields suddenly are up by anywhere between 4 to 5% compared to where they should really be. And I think they will compress over the next 2 years as people get more comfortable about residential and they realize that, the last 7 years, which were tough, is not the case for the next 4 5 years. Right. At the same time, though, to playing residential is not like the old time where you just used to buy a house and then expect a 10-15% appreciation. I think at the unit level, the appreciation will be more linked to inflation. But then there are other ways to play residential real estate, which is either through managed ideas, managed structures, credit, or bulk inventory as a part of some kind of a product, right? I think on the office and industrial, office, lot of interest. A lot of people are very comfortable doing office, and nothing wrong with that. And I think where people are getting a good asset with a great tenant, it is still a good opportunity. But people should be very, very careful about their tenant, because vacancy, if it happens, is very difficult to fill, and it will be so for the next some time. I think industrial is another great. I mean, industrial means warehousing and all that. I think that will have a good operating run. Overall, the returns that you can make, I think you should expect more like 9 to 10% max post-tax, including appreciation. Anybody saying more than that is generally difficult in that segment, right? But that's the thing. So I think those are the three to play, in my view, in this manner. Land, I think, is a topic close to many people's heart, and a lot of historical money is in land. So land is great, by the way. I think it's a great thing. But honestly, you should only do land with an expectation of making at least 25 to 30% return. It is hard. It is very hard to do. You need to really know municipal regulations. You have to protect it. You don't want somebody coming and putting his cow on that land and then, you struggling to evict. So it's a difficult one to do. So you need to have that knowledge, infrastructure, local connect to do so. Urban, I mean, like in Mumbai, you just can't buy any land. You have to go out, right? That's the thing.
Thanks, Ashish. Ashish, you've been managing the institutional money for, I think, several years now. So quickly, what is your experience on managing that institutional money, and how do they look at to invest in India?
Right. So, that's, I think, is a great question, because there has been a significant divergence between the experience of foreign institutional investors with their investments in India and the way they had been doing, way they had been committed to India real estate investing versus the experience of a lot of domestic investors, right? And I will come to the reasons on that. But just to give some perspective, and again, I will just bring up a bit of a slide here. So if people can see this is really the story of Indian institutional real estate investing over the last 10 years. So really, institutional real estate investing in India started only in 2005. Before that, there was not much, flexibility. Foreign investment was allowed only in 2005. And since then, over the last 10 odd years, about close to 50 billion. These numbers are 2019, but then last year about close to $9 billion came, right? You have received almost close to $50 billion plus. And a lot of that has actually accelerated over the last 4-5 years. Also, the other thing you would see is they are increasing the size of their bets. Average deal size used to be about $40 million, right? Or I would say, close to about 300 odd crores, 250 to 300 crores. Typically now average size has become 600 to 700 crores. And all this money is coming from some of the most entrenched, some of the smartest global investors. It's private equity, it's sovereign wealth. your sovereign wealth, meaning, government's money, like Singapore government money, Canadian pension money, and so on and so forth, right? So you would see that there has been a pretty significant and increasing interest. And we would think of COVID year being an year where people would scale back and look at their home countries, but not at all. I mean, these are just some of the populated deals. These are asset acquisitions, people buying offices, etc. Some retail also, REITs buying offices. Almost close to 50,000 crore was invested last year in doing so. Also, I mean, basically people providing money to the real estate sector to help developers, help developmental projects. We have about 16,000 crore there. So if you put it together, almost 60,000 crore last year. So across the board, people have been investing this money. Institutional investors have been investing this money across offices, across residential, across industrial, a little bit towards retail, and so on and so forth. And why they like this is, whatever said and done, India is still, from a pure demographics point of view, is still a country where this growth has to be fundamentally there. I mean, if our population is young, if every year we are adding about 10 million people to the workforce, you would need homes, you would need offices, you would need all the ancillary infrastructure. So all the institutional investors are betting that. But I think there is one fundamental difference in between how at least managed opportunities or real estate funds have been pitched to domestic investors and how institutions have done it, global institutions have done it. See, real estate is not venture capital, by the way. So there is no reason for it to produce 25% return for you. It is actually, in our opinion, it is a hybrid asset class. It is somewhere between debt and equity. It is asset backed. So if done properly, you should have a lot of protection of your money. It is not like investing into a startup which can, give you a sixer or it'll get zero. Actually, real estate should never go to zero. Ultimately, this is a hard asset, right? But what has happened is that for whatever reason, in India, it has always been presented as a very high return opportunity, 22%, 23%, and so on and so forth. And that is where I think it has caused the problem, because then to try and make that return, a lot of fund managers, etc., had to take extreme risks, which I don't think, as an individual, you want to take it, you go ahead and take it. But if you are managing somebody's money, that shouldn't be the base case. So you going and doing a slum rehabilitation project, it doesn't make any sense, to be honest. You're going and doing redevelopmental projects. I think, in my opinion, there are just so many variables and the timing can move around uncontrollably and so on and so forth. So you shouldn't be doing that. So our mantra on this one, and a lot of people, so when foreign investors have done asset-backed investing, they are doing a very simple play. They are saying, okay, there is a 4-5% inflation in the Indian market, right? Typically between 8-9%, especially when you're deploying big amount of money, you can really make there, right? And then there is a little bit of a growth. So growth happens differently. So if you have the competency to pick the right direction of a city, right, then between the basic return, between a normal inflation and just getting your basic expertise right on what you should pick and what you should not. So just to give you an example, let's say Nariman Point, which used to be a major office micro market, has reduced in importance and BKC has become a lot more important. So if you will go 10 years back, the rental of BKC was much different than what it is today. And that is what is really picking the direction of the city. Similarly, if I were to give the example of Bangalore, if you will invest in East Bangalore, Whitefield was one of the most significant office blocks to come. But today, North Bangalore is a lot more important. And the appreciation in rentals in North Bangalore is a lot more than what happened in Whitefield. Now, as a smart investor and as an expert real estate investor, when you're doing these things, you are not honestly just looking at, okay, this office asset is giving me 7.5, this is 8, this is 8.5. That is fine. That is the simplest thing to do. But you should be figuring out where, which is going to be the emerging location. and where I am going, what is the demand supply, where the vacancy risk will increase, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the play people have done. And with that, doing that play, I think people have been somewhere in the high teens to early 20s kind of returns in general. And to us, that is the difference between a lot of this institutional investing, which therefore has been more stable, versus a lot of domestic products, which have left a lot of blood on the street, to be honest. So that's the difference. But I think institutions are going to continue to pile on India. And I think it's time that Indian investors start thinking about doing their real estate investing in a somewhat different way. We have some thoughts. We'll chat about that as we go along.
Thanks, Ashish. I think that's quite a good insight. Two thoughts from what you just mentioned. One, a very critical point, you mentioned real estate as a hybrid asset class. So a thought comes, what as a portfolio allocation should be ideally towards real estate as a percentage of the portfolio. Second thought from what you mentioned, real estate at the end of the day, it's a hard asset. But what we are seeing is it's changing its color. It's moving towards being a financial asset. Maybe just at the beginning of the century or beginning of the era, real estate is getting the color of being a financial asset now. Considering that if it's a financial asset or a quasi-financial asset, what should be the ideal allocation of this asset in the portfolio as a percentage?
Right. So yeah, you guys are allocation experts. How can I answer something like that? Right. I mean, every time I meet Mukesh, he's always telling me where my allocation needs to be. But I will kind of talk in the language that you have only taught us, which is to simply say that I think people make allocations between more volatile assets and non-volatile assets. Right. So I, as an investor, can have a risk appetite of having 80% in equities. If you are Mukesh, you have 110% allocation to equities, I think. So I would rather say that when you think of your allocations, one way to think about it is, okay, where do I want to be between volatile and non-volatile? Right. So volatile will include everything: your listed equities, unlisted equities, venture funds, whatever, high risk, high volatile. And if I'm going to be 60%, 40% volatile, non-volatile, then within that 40%, my sense would be you should be at least 50% in real estate, but buying in large in today's time in financialized real estate. Unless you are an expert investor yourself and you can pick physical real estate. That would be my thing. And the reason I say that is because, non-volatile, what all can you really do? Liquids and bank FDs are a disaster today. On a post-tax basis, you're probably losing at least 3% value of your money every year, if not more. So then you have to be into something else. Then either you are taking a little bit more credit risk with some other kind of ideas, debt ideas, whatever, etc., etc. I think what we love about real estate, if done properly, is it is one asset class which has the ability to pay you decent regular cash flow and still protect you against inflation. So on an overall basis, you can be in the zip code of anywhere between 12-15% overall. But most debt products that would give you that kind of return will be very illiquid, even real estate is. But many of them don't have any regular cash flow. Many of those products are accrual products. And then I think any accrual product, in my own opinion, just keeps compounding your risk because it is coming back to you at a point in time. So on the other hand, in most real estate ideas, you can keep getting some monthly or quarterly income, and you will still get a little bit of a alpha at the end and make that. So that's how, in fact, we are trying to manage our own personal portfolio also, by the way. So that's just my thought, but I think allocation is a very personal topic, so everybody will decide on their own.
Thanks, Ashish, on that. I definitely agree. It's a very personalized thing, and every person has a different asset allocation, and that's why we are there.
Right.
So having said that, Ashish, I think you highlighted a very important point. The yields on the debt is, pretty less. If someone has a fixed deposit or, even the debt funds post-tax, it becomes an issue. Hopefully the yields will start going up. But I think that is also, driving the market forces. If you look globally, a lot of financialization is happening. And, all this Robinhood and, retail investors, crypto, and, even in India, the shares market is being driven a lot by the retail investors. And you have more investors now. And, everyone is trying to reach out to these people. And if you look at the US, especially it's much ahead in, coming out with new developments, new products. And you have, private equity investments or even unlisted investments or real estate investments, which used to be large ticket size. And, it was more individual driven. Right. Now they have been financialized, and even, retail investors or small investors can participate in them, right. With the expertise of people who were not earlier available. Right. So what's happening on this, and where are we in India? Yeah.
No, I think that's exactly so. So two things. One is that in general, real estate has remained an important allocation for everyone across the globe. Whether you take the largest of pension funds, insurance companies, and so on and so forth, right? Again, just very simple. The reason that I mentioned earlier, which is it gives you current income and it protects you against inflation. And globally, yes, it is considered to be that hybrid asset, which is somewhere in between debt and equity. But then at the same time, doing physical assets is a very difficult task, both in terms of executing the investment and then managing it. And that is where also sometimes people's experiences do not end up being great, because as an individual, I mean, despite doing real estate as a profession, if I have to manage my own personal real estate, that is what gets neglected, because you don't really have the focus, or most people would not have the expertise specifically to handle that. So this effort to financialize real estate is actually 50-year-old almost. Started in the 70s with REITs, Real Estate Investment Trust. In India, they're only 2-year-old, and they're already gaining good traction. So financial real estate means nothing but underlying it is real estate. But then on top of it, somebody has some expert or an expert team or an organization has made sure that they have created a financial structure wherein an individual can participate. So REITs, I mean, I am sure most of this audience would know that already, but REIT is nothing but it's like a mutual fund. A mutual fund is also a trust where the manager is basically buying equities and you're owning a unit in a trust. It's exactly the same thing. Real estate investment trust is same. So that's the oldest and most known form of real estate. So if you buy an embassy office REIT, you will get rent on a quarter basis as they distribute. And those assets, if they even appreciate by inflation, you should get 4-5%, right? The only thing is, like a REIT, its price, like a share, its price moves daily. So at some point, that price is at the right level where you should be getting 6-7% dividend yield. But sometimes that gets driven to a level where you can only get 3% at that price. So you just need to know where to buy. But what is happening and what's a lot more interesting, and I will show a little bit on that, is over the last 10 years, people have been doing stuff with the help of technology, almost like a fintech kind of play, where they are bringing institutional quality deals and institutional quality asset management, risk management for individual investments. And to us, that I think is fantastic. I mean, in some way, we equate that to what happened to equities 25 years ago. So before advent of mutual funds, everybody used to just do their own stock. And a lot of that stock picking will be driven by tips, will be driven by mood, sentiment, not to say that it's not happening today. but still, like a lot of us, who are not doing direct equities only do mutual funds. So you have entrusted that expertise to somebody else. I think in real estate, the exact same thing needs to happen. And now it's happening. So what's the difference there is that now as an individual, you can have a better flavor of what's going to be in that deal. Take a look at it, but still leave it to the expert. So let me just show something on that, which is where I think the topic of fractional investments, Mukesh, as you said, the name of this thing. Yeah, I mean, so I've just brought up some interesting examples of these new age ideas. Cadre is a platform in the US. It's probably worth more than $2.5 billion today. So this is a platform where some ex-Blackstone team, Blackstone is the largest institutional real estate investor in the world. They came out, they started this, they effectively made private equity style deals and asset management available to individuals. So what it does is, otherwise, if you want to benefit from this kind of an opportunity, you have to be an investor in these large funds, which mostly is available only to institutions, not individuals. And the best ones are only available that way, right? But now you can actually go to these places, look at what are the deals. There is a lot of financialization that is happening. There is a lot of knowledge imparting that is happening. About micro markets. I saw somebody asking about Chennai and Coimbatore. So if any of these kind of a platform were to be in India and running a deal there, they will give you a lot of information about that, right? So you're hearing that information from the expert. So effectively what they did was, people were interested, but they could not participate because they are not institutions. And generally speaking, the size of each of these tickets used to be very large. Now, if there is a 100 crore office, very few people can buy themselves. But if that 100 crore is made into segments of 25 lakh each, a lot of people can buy. Only thing I would caution, so I think this is happening and this is the trend and this will continue to happen. This is where we are also doing something which we are very excited about. But the only thing that people must keep in mind, and internationally it's a bit more mature, so that is already taken care of. Most of these platforms come from people, have been brought in by people who have very strong real estate investing expertise. But what is also happening is, because this is a trend, people are also putting technology platform with limited investment expertise. So whenever as a user you want to see that, it is just best to really do your own diligence in terms of, okay, who are the people behind, how much investing in real estate they would have done, what are their areas of expertise, and so on and so forth. But otherwise, I think, instead of you going and investing into a residential property or investing into an office property or anything, you're much better off doing this, and then the asset manager taking the load off it.
Thanks, Ashish. That's again a great insight. Now it's almost halfway, a little bit more than half, and I think we are all heated up to jump on the fractional real estate investing. I think you're the pioneer. Let me announce this to audience. I think Ashish is and his team are the pioneers to bring this or champion this concept in India, and we are fortunate that we are going to listen about this from the horse's mouth. Ashish, your views on fractional real estate investing and advantages and disadvantages of the same.
Yeah, so I think so. We just, at a conceptual level, we just talked about it, and there are a few people who are doing it in India. We are keen to do it in India. So basic advantage, you have a team of experts who knows this business well. Of course, as investors, you need to develop trust on that team over a period of time. People should start small and see how their experience is, both in terms of investment performance, transparency, reporting, and everything of that sort. But otherwise, it could be your opportunity to make a high yield return of 14-15% with solid senior secured lending. It could be your opportunity to invest into a warehouse, which can give you 6-7% rental yield and 4-5% this thing without requiring to actually go to different corners of the country and trying to do it yourself, right? It could be your opportunity to buy into a much better quality office than what you could individually buy, because a lot of better quality offices only sell at much larger ticket sizes or at a full floor basis or so on and so forth than buildings which have smaller format offices, right? So I think all these, and there will be so many different areas of doing that. I mean, what excites us the most, which we mentioned earlier also, is one theme that we really like is residential, where markets are coming back strongly, but capital availability is not there, right? So to give an example on that, almost 45,000 crores was being invested by various NBFCs and housing finance companies on a per annum basis into residential sector till September 2018. After September 2018, when ILFS happened, a lot of that money got pulled back. Like, Franklin Templeton and all that, we have all heard those stories. I mean, effectively, we were giving our money to the likes of those mutual funds. Those mutual funds were giving the money to the likes of NBFCs, and a lot of that NBFC money was going into various different things, including real estate. So when that got pulled back, the returns on your senior secured debt has spiked by 4-5%. So what used to happen at 13-14% is today available at anywhere between 15 to 20%. And foreign institutional investors have been doing exactly that. We closed almost 2,400 crore of such deals with these foreign institutional investors over the last 2-3 years since starting this. So what we are now trying to do is bring some of these opportunities, similar opportunities, for individual investment, where at a minimum ticket size of 10 lakhs, which are some SEBI mandated prices, ticket sizes, you can do it. And we are starting a platform that is called Earnest, EARNNEST, which is basically earnings, a nest of earnings. That has been our motivation around it. Earnest.me, not .com, .me, because kind of thought it's very personal and not commercial, in that sense. So where we are trying to do the same thing, Nikhil. I mean, we're out there with that. We will see how people like it, etc. So,
thanks, Ashish. Thank you so much, and congratulations for your new venture, and wishing you a lot of success in that.
thank you.
Now, you've started this, and you told that it's on the fractional investing. So, would you like to tell us if you have any interesting deal, which you think is attractive, which is high quality compliance, and which investors can look at? Maybe I can look, or the audience over here can look at. You want to share any details?
So I will talk very briefly about it, Mukesh, because not to take away from people who may want to not invest too much time listening about a deal, or people can go, but just to showcase how we are going about it a little bit. I'll just bring up the screen here. So this is how we have put the whole platform together. The idea being whatever we had been doing with the institutions over the last so many years becomes available for people. You talked about a transaction. We are working on a transaction as we speak. We have done a lot of diligence on it, and we are finishing that diligence. But the idea of this platform is to bring all different kind of opportunities, fixed return opportunities, yielding asset opportunities with a little bit of an equity flavor onto the platform over a period of time. And then when people are here, they should have the ability to look through the opportunity in a reasonable amount of detail, get comfortable around that. And this is exactly being done because also of a lot of people having bad experiences in the past. So we are saying we want to make it very transparent, and you have the opportunity to talk to our investment experts. And then if you like it, the deal size is small enough for people to experience it. And if you like the experience, then slowly and slowly, we hope that people would want to do more and more. So the whole idea, I talked about this analogy earlier, is it should be as easy and as transparent as you do other more mature financial products like mutual funds and all that. So you should have the ability to do. This is a particular transaction we are working on, which is in Pune, very well located in an area called Baner. A lot of performance, but basic. So there is nothing to be solved on the project level. We don't want to solve anything on the project level. If it is not a performing project, it's not our risk. I mean, going back to my earlier thesis, real estate as a solution, the idea is not to take high risk to make very high return. The idea is to take low risk, make moderate return. And within that, if we can bring our expertise to identify market dislocations. So just as I was saying, while the sector is performing, but the capital is not there. And that is why you are getting 3-4% more. In my opinion, this will compress again. Like if you had the courage to buy in March 2020 last year, you would be making an enormous amount of money, right? So it's a little bit like not the exact same thing, but it's a little bit like that. There is a dislocation which is spiking the returns. So that's what I think, I would just in the chat type the address. If people would like to visit, they can visit and they can always call us.
Thanks, Ashish, and we wish you good luck. I'm sure this is going to be a hit. The entire concept itself is quite niche for India. Ashish, the example which you just mentioned, 17%, 10 lakh ticket size, the investment opportunity. Also, obviously, you mentioned about capital availability is one of the key reason. But what we have seen in books and also what we have been experiencing, risk and return are wherever you are, whether it's in Singapore, Switzerland, Japan, risk and return matrix is same.
Right.
With that, real estate developer, we are earning 17%. Number one, I'm sure we are taking a higher risk, although you mentioned you cover those points, but we are taking higher risk. Otherwise, the developer would ideally go to bank with the current scenario, with current interest rates, where he would still fetch a 9-10%, even if it's slightly risky, 10-11% type of funding. Why would, what is the math behind investing at a high risk, 17%, and covering our risk, and developer not getting funds at 9-10%?
I think that's again a very good question, Nikhil. So, so basically, even if you follow how real estate financing happens, in India, still about 80% of residential, and residential is the largest real estate asset class. If about 40 million square feet of office happens every year, almost about 200 million square feet of residential happen every year, right? So residential is the largest, but still about 80% of that is with non-listed or non-top developers. Whatever DLF, Oberoi, Panchsheel, Shobha, Prestige, Embassy, you put them all together. And then also, I don't think they will cross 20%. So whatever said and done, a very large segment of this remains with people who are not this top 20, as opposed to some other industries which are a lot more consolidated. Right. And this consolidation is happening, but it will still keep happening over a period of time. So any which ways, banks, one by regulation, by RBI related restrictions, and otherwise also in terms of their own ability to understand real estate. See, real estate, infrastructure, and other manufacturing sectors across the globe are three different segments. In every private equity firm, you would see infrastructure is a different group, real estate is a different group, and a lot of other sectors are a different group. Within the other sectors also, of course, there are verticals, but they will all get classified as private equity. Real estate teams will get classified as real estate. Infrastructure teams will get classified as infrastructure, right? So there is a slight different this thing. And most banks actually have never really created expertise to do deep real estate underwriting. They actually do more name-based lending. So they're comfortable just giving money to Oberoi. They're comfortable just giving money to, let's say, a Prestige or a DLF, right? But they are, in most cases, not going super deep into what the underwriting. That is where the whole ecosystem of NBFCs came. And the good NBFCs who did well, I think, are actually now doubling down. But a lot of people jumped into it just because it was offering higher return, and they were not suited to do it. Like, you were actually a retail NBFC leverage at 9-10 times. And then you're doing this, which shouldn't be done with 9-10 times of leverage at an NBFC balance sheet level. So that is what caused a lot of this bloodbath that happened, and which has pulled back almost 50,000 crores. It used to be 45,000 per annum going into the sector. Over the last 18 months, it has been minus 5,000. So that is what, so therefore for this 80% of the segment where the money used to come from has suddenly shut down, which is where all these foreign funds have been investing, which is where all the work that we had been doing, this 2,400 crores that I talked about, had been coming. So some of the bigger names also, it has been in the papers, have been taking money from foreign institutional investors. Foreign institutional investors actually operate at anywhere between 18 to 22%. So they are also not saying they're taking bad project risk, they're just taking market advantage of this market dislocation. So where the comfort comes from. So it is being done in two ways. One is that where there is already a lot of historic. So in real estate, what also happens, there is a lot of historical equity. Now, if you bought this land 10, 15 years ago, it has appreciated a lot. Like in this Pune example, what is really happening is this gentleman has a land which he bought long back, and it is actually now almost 5-6x of that. So that is being made as a part of this transaction, and it is providing us some additional cover, right? There is already a history of he's selling 5 lakh square feet in this project. All we need to sell is only 1.5 lakhs to really exit. So there are these, so basically it's just this dislocation which is giving you this return today. In the normal course, what you should expect from these kind of opportunities is more like 13-14%, which I think we've done systematically is still interesting enough. That's the thing.
Thank you so much, Ashish. I think this session is turning out to be very interesting. A lot to learn about the new developments and the opportunities which are there. And I think, the session can go for a pretty long time. There are many questions which I personally have to ask, but I think we are running out of time. There are only last 10 minutes to go. So what we will do is we will, take up the questions from the audience. And so I'll take them. So audience, clients, everyone who are there, if you have any questions for Ashish, you can put it in the Q&A section or the chat section, and Nikhil and myself will take up on that. And what I've also done is, we are taking feedback on the webinar. So there's a form. It takes only a minute to fill the form. It will help us in making the delivery and content better. So please do fill the form. So coming to the audience questions, we already have some questions, Ashish. So Madhusudanji is asking that in retail and residential property, the yield is less than 3%, which is lower than the bank saving account. Right. So where is the scope for retail investors, especially in real estate? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, you should never buy residential for investing.
Is it?
Never. Okay. That is why I think so. So the way to participate in residential is therefore very different. So he is absolutely right. I think there was a time when residential rate appreciation used to be about 10% and then it was fine, right? But what has happened is that basically today, I think the industry has matured. Earlier, it used to be so because most of the funding only used to come from home buyers. And developer will buy the land. He would not have even bought the land, but he would launch the project, collect half the money from customers only and go and buy the land. But today with RERA, Real Estate Regulation Act and all that, you just can't do all of that. So therefore, by the time you can really buy, it has already changed. It has already, a lot of that appreciation is out. So the way to participate really is, therefore, you have to work on these managed structures. Like, for example, we are taking a bet on residential, but we are trying to make 14-15%. But we are doing it in an institutional way. Everything has been mortgaged to us. We are looking at the overall project cash flows. We know this kind of return can be made. But if I buy a house, I cannot make it. Or there are other ideas that we're working on where we can create a financing structure by buying bulk inventory, which is still solving a working capital problem for a project. So that's the way to do it, but not by buying a single unit of residential and trying to make money on it.
Thanks. I think you've mentioned truly, residential is more becoming a consumption rather than a return generating asset. That's true. We have a question from RBH, maybe Robin Noda. Okay, on a lighter note, there are many residential properties which are stuck it's a very nice question. As the builders have gone belly up, in some case the matter is now with IPIR, the insolvency, like JP Noida.
Right.
What is the future of these projects that are stuck, and can we expect investors to come in and start bailing them out?
Yes, so I think there has been a lot of work on that. So there are two aspects to it. One is the social aspect, because a lot of people who bought homes in these got stuck. So government last year actually bought this fund called Swami Fund, which is an initiative of central government in collaboration with State Bank of India. And the only mandate of that fund is to provide money to these kind of projects, bring in new partners if need be to complete them. And that has been done not so much from the perspective of making investment returns, but more from the perspective of making sure these projects get completed. So that I think is a key thing. And all of these have been lessons, which is where exactly market is consolidating. This is exactly the lesson in terms of, as an individual, you going and buying few units in this as an investment, right? And but if it is a good team, he should be looking into it, whether they should be investing into that project or not, and is this group right? Even decent groups have been stuck because the market cycle has been very, very, very difficult with DMON, with RERA, with GST. So a lot of reforms also cause pain, at least in the short term, right? So I think two things there. One, yes, there is this government effort and initiatives to solve. Second, can you make investment returns out of it? Answer to that is yes. And those investment returns then has to be very high, because you're actually almost talking about a distressed opportunity and not a performing opportunity. A lot of our work on the institution side remains that. On Earnest, we are not aspiring to do that, because I think the risk of those opportunities is high. So it's a higher risk, higher return game, better done by institutions. But yes, if somebody has the appetite and a way to execute, there is that opportunity that exists.
Thanks, Ashish. I think that's rightly put. There is a question by Mr. Sud. In the last decade, the real estate investment has given almost no return, which is somewhere, it's true. It's almost no return. Do you think now is the right time to should invest in real estate?
So again, it depends on which real estate you're talking about. If you are talking about buying a residential house about 7-8 years ago and it giving you no return, answer to that is absolutely yes, because prices have been flat and yield on residential is low. My sense is even a simple residential house, if bought in the right location in the right kind of property, will end up giving you 7-8% return, which honestly is not great. You shouldn't be doing it for that. 3% on the rental yield and about 4-5% on the appreciation side, right? On the other hand, I think office had done quite well over the last decade, but we feel that that will be a little bit under pressure going forward. So I think it's time to invest in real estate, but again, I would encourage people to think about financialized real estate as opposed to buying it on their own. They can look at REIT units. I mean, honestly, REIT portfolios are the best if you are able to understand how to go, like you understand stocks, how to go and buy REITs, right? You can look at fractional ownership with a competent team. I would again encourage, whenever people are looking at fractional ownership platforms and these are new, please dig into the quality of the team that they are doing. And if you have the comfort, look at residential credit. I mean, we are quite bullish about that. And you would hear narrative from the likes of JM and Motilal. These people have done better in managing their residential credit portfolios, and they are taking the benefit of that. So I think that is a very, very interesting risk reward, which people should not paint with the brush of what happened earlier, but try and relook at them with a fresh eye.
Thanks, Ashish. Since you raised a question on REIT, there's a question from Mr. Ajay Singh. So he wants to know, how does your scheme compare with REITs and real estate funds, like IIFL offered with some collateralized return? So, there are funds, there are REITs, so funds are also available. So how does your platform, how does your investment differ from them?
So I think one of the most fundamental difference in our platform versus a fund, I won't compare it with a REIT. REIT is very different, and I will still draw the comparison. But between a fund, typically what will happen is you will have to allocate money to the fund manager. In India, minimum amount is 1 crore in a alternative investment fund, AIF, right? And you will have to rely on what the manager would do on that, right? And as long as you have developed that comfort with the manager, you should do that. What we are trying to do is slightly different. We are bringing similar opportunities that we would buy in a fund, but we are making it a lot more transparent. We are making them accessible at a much smaller ticket size. So the point is that you can actually go and understand the opportunity better as to what it is, right? It also serves as a little bit more education for the potential investor and a lot more transparency. And if you had the same 1 crore, you could understand those 10 investments better and allocate 10 lakhs to each of those. And you can actually create a bit of a mixed portfolio, because otherwise you will say, okay, this is a residential fund, this is an office fund. You can say, okay, fine, but I want to invest 5 crores, but I don't want to give it to one fund. I will take some commercial, I will take some residential credit, I will do various different things. So idea is to make it very transparent. Also, the liquidity is better. Typically, the funds will return you the money when they mature. Here, our idea on Earnest is to actually bring products which have quarterly liquidity. In the sense, every quarter they are paying a certain amount of return and over a period of time. So they're regular cash flowing products.
Thanks, Ashish, for that. The two questions asked, one question asked by two persons, one is Mr. Ajay Agrawal and another is RBH. I think I'll merge these two questions so that we'll save time. One is on the regulation of your product, in terms of how they are regulated. Second, although you've covered this, that how will your product achieve 17%, but if you can just again brush upon that, because both are your product-centric questions.
Right. So point number one, yes, whatever we are bringing, they will be regulated products. Generally speaking, if it is a debt product, it is typically under private placement of debt guidelines of SEBI. A lot of that we may invest ourselves and then make it available for investors to buy. Also, what we are doing is, for example, in this transaction, we are investing around 10% money. So our money is where our mouth is. Our money is aligned with our investors' money. And the whole idea is, it is just not that we do something, put it up and people invest. We are investing with you, right? So that's one. Coming to how we can make 17% return on it, again, I think we will be more than happy to take the question in detail, because it is a half an hour question in itself if people want to get into the thesis of it. But the very simple thing, and you would see, like last month, we closed a transaction which was a 1,000 crore transaction of Bain Capital, a foreign investor, investing into Embassy Group. Now, Embassy Group is very big, Bain is very big. And when these funds operate, they operate in the similar zip code of return. And why is that investment happening? It's pretty much the same thing, because the Indian financial system is a little bit shut right now for these this kind of capital, and that's why this opportunity is there. But otherwise, if I were to say, okay, 17% will make you feel it is a very high risk proposition. Why it is not is, in one line, if I were to describe, it's a 6-tower project. 4 towers have been completed and handed over. We take mortgage on the balance 2 towers. We take mortgage on some very prime land. We operate at whatever way we value, at least 2.5x cover of mortgaged assets. And the moment you just finish the 5th tower, your money comes back. Detailed assessment of approvals and costing is done. So again, to give an example, we use the same agencies that we use on institution. The person who did our diligence for approvals and costing is the same person who did the diligence for this 1,000 crore transaction. So there is absolutely no difference in how an institutional, that is the whole proposition of the platform. What institutions do, as you slowly understand and develop trust, ideas to bring in the same thing. But you're getting this just because today banks won't do this and NBFCs are out of the picture. That's the thing.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you so much for your time. I think we will wrap up because we are just 3 minutes, overshot our time limit. Thank you so much, Ashish, for your time, the insights. Although you have covered this, the differentiation in terms of bringing a professional management and undertaking this investment multiple time in all your answers. I think let me just sum it up to all our audience. In real estate funding, there obviously when you go to an NBFC, as Ashish also covered, there may be a lot of restrictions in terms of allocation policy. But the more finer things, like Ashish just mentioned, the last point, like selling 5 lakh square feet and just available 15 lakhs, 1,50,000 square feet. So there is always some points which are finer points which are not covered in financial balance sheets, which is where we have these professional management team of Ashish and Ernest, which covers our risk and covering risk, bringing it to investment with fractionalization. I think this is a win-win situation for both the investor and the professional management team of Ashish. Ernest, thank you so much, Ashish, again for your time and the insights on real estate investment and fractional investing. We're looking forward to touch base with you with a lot of retail money very soon. Thank you, all your audience, all our audience, for joining this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Ashish. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks.